Colonel Carrasco bought the most beautiful virgin sisters at the auction to be his every night. He just didn't imagine they would plan such a brutal revenge. The auctioneer's hammer fell with a sickening crack. Two sisters, barely 17 and 15, stood trembling on the block as Colonel Garrison's cold eyes traveled over them like they were livestock. He paid triple the asking price without blinking. "Wrap them up," he told his overseer. "I want them in my quarters tonight." But the colonel didn't know was that these girls had already watched him murder their mother 6 months ago, and in the darkness of his own bedroom, they were about to make him pay for every single sin. This is a story of survival, revenge, and two sisters who refused to be broken, no matter what hell they had to endure first. The August heat pressed down on the auction yard in Natchez, Mississippi, like an iron weight. Flies buzzed around the wooden platform where human beings were sold like cattle, and the smell of sweat and fear hung thick in the air. It was 1837, and the cotton economy was booming, which meant the slave trade was more brutal than ever. 16-year-old Dela stood on that platform with her younger sister Cora, clutching her hands so tight it hurt. They'd been standing there for 2 hours already, displayed like merchandise, while white men circled and examined them with the casual cruelty of buyers at a horse market. Dela kept her eyes fixed on a spot in the distance, trying to disappear inside her own mind the way Mama had taught them before she died, before he killed her. "That's the Carrington girls," she heard one merchant whisper to another. Their mama was that pretty house slave from the Thornhill plantation. She tried to fight off an overseer last winter and got herself hanged for it. Dela's jaw clenched. That wasn't the whole truth. Mama hadn't just fought off any overseer. She'd fought off Colonel Marcus Garrison himself when he'd come to the Thornhill place drunk and violent one January night. He'd been visiting his cousin who owned their plantation, and he'd decided Mama would warm his bed whether she wanted to or not. She'd scratched his face so deep the marks were still visible at her hanging, and he'd made sure everyone watched when they put the rope around her neck. Now that same man stood at the front of the crowd, his gray beard neatly trimmed, his expensive suit marking him as one of the wealthiest plantation owners in the Mississippi Delta. He owned 3,000 acres and over 200 slaves, and he was known throughout the region for his particular appetites and his absolute cruelty. The auctioneer, a red-faced man named Sykes, started his pitch. "Now, gentlemen, we have something special here. Two sisters, healthy as horses, young and unspoiled. The older one has an education, can read and write, which makes her valuable for housework. The young one is pretty as a magnolia blossom. Together or separate, these girls will fetch a fine price." Dela felt Cora shaking beside her. Her little sister was only 14 with the same dark eyes and smooth brown skin as their mama. She was terrified, and Dela couldn't protect her. Not here, not now. "Do I hear 500? Sykes called out. 500, someone shouted. 600, another voice joined. Then Colonel Garrison stepped forward, and the crowd went quiet. Everyone knew his reputation. Everyone knew what happened to the young women he purchased. 1,500, the colonel said calmly, "for both." The silence was absolute. That was 3 times what anyone expected to pay. Sykes stammered, "Sir, that's most generous. Going once, going twice." Sold to Colonel Garrison, Sykes finished, bringing his hammer down with that terrible crack that meant their fate was sealed. The colonel walked up to the platform, his boots heavy on the wood. He stopped directly in front of Dela and lifted her chin with one finger, forcing her to meet his eyes. She saw no recognition there. He didn't remember her from that night 6 months ago, when he'd stood laughing as her mother swung from a rope. But Dela remembered everything. "You'll both come with me tonight," he said quietly, his breath smelling of whiskey and tobacco. "I paid good money for you, and I expect excellent returns on my investment. My overseer will take you to my house. You'll bathe, dress in the clothes provided, and wait in my chambers. Is that understood?" Dela's voice came out steady despite the rage boiling in her chest. "Yes, master. Good girl." He patted her cheek like she was a dog, then turned to Cora. "And you, little one, I especially paid extra for you. Don't disappoint me." Cora couldn't speak, she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. As the colonel walked away to complete the paperwork, Dela squeezed her sister's hand 3 times, their secret signal that meant stay strong. "I have a plan," because she did have a plan. She'd been working on it every single day since Mama's death. The colonel thought he'd bought 2 terrified girls to abuse at his leisure. What he'd actually purchased was his own destruction. The overseer, a scarred man named Pike, shackled to air wrists and led them to a wagon. As they rode toward the colonel's plantation house, a massive white mansion that rose up from the cotton fields like a monument to stolen wealth and human suffering, Della felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Tonight would be the beginning. The colonel wanted them in his private quarters, isolated from the other slaves, with no witnesses to his crimes. Perfect. He'd made it easy for them. The colonel's plantation house stood 3 stories tall with white columns that gleamed in the fading sunlight. Spanish moss hung from ancient oak trees that lined the long driveway. Della counted 20 slaves working in the yards alone, gardeners, stable hands, workers carrying supplies. None of them looked up as the wagon passed. Pike drove them around to a side entrance. You get hunted down and made an example of if you try anything. You understand? Yes, sir, Della said quietly. There's a woman named Ruthie who manages the house slaves. She'll get you ready for tonight. The colonel expects you in his chambers by 9. He doesn't like to be kept waiting. They were pushed through a narrow doorway into the servants' quarters. A small, wiry woman in her 50s appeared, her grey hair tied back in a tight bun. These the new girls? Ruthie asked, her voice flat and emotionless. Colonel's special purchases, Pike said with a nasty grin. Get them cleaned up real nice. After Pike left, Ruthie studied them both. Come with me, she said finally. She led them upstairs to a small bathroom. There was a copper tub already filled with warm water and soap. Strip down and wash yourselves thoroughly, Ruthie instructed. When you're done, put on the dresses laid out in the next room. Do your hair neat. The colonel likes his girls to look civilized before he... She stopped herself. Just do as you're told, and maybe you'll survive the night. Have you worked here long? Della asked carefully. Ruthie's expression hardened, long enough to know better than to ask questions. You're not the first young girls the colonel's brought here, and you won't be the last. Some learn to endure, some break, some disappear. That's all I'm saying. After Ruthie left, Cora finally broke down completely, sobbing into Della's shoulder. I can't do this, Della. I can't let him touch me. I'd rather die. Della held her sister tight. Listen to me, Cora. Listen carefully. Tonight is not what you think. Remember what Mama taught us about the oleander plant. Cora pulled back, confused. The poison? Mama worked in the Thornhill house for years. She learned things. She told me about plants, about medicines, about poisons. I've been collecting oleander leaves for 6 months. I dried them and ground them into powder. I have it hidden in a small pouch sewn into my undergarments. You mean? I mean tonight the colonel drinks his evening whiskey, and tonight his whiskey will have something extra in it. Enough to make him very sick. Maybe enough to stop his heart. But either way, he won't be touching you or me ever again. Cora's eyes went wide. But they'll know it was us. They'll hang us like they hanged Mama. Not if we're smart. The colonel drinks heavily every night. If his heart gives out, they'll blame the whiskey and his age. He's almost 60, but we have to be perfect. We have to act exactly like terrified girls who just watched their new master die unexpectedly. They washed in silence. The dresses Ruthie had laid out were fine white cotton with blue flowers. The colonel's sick preferences were on full display. Della checked her hidden pouch. The powder was still there. One chance was all they had. At 8:30, Ruthie returned. It's time. She led them to the colonel's private suite. He'll come up at 9, Ruthie said. There's whiskey on the sideboard. He'll expect you to pour for him. I'm sorry for what's going to happen to you. Then she pushed them inside. Della found the sideboard immediately. Cora, stand by the window and watch for him, Della whispered. I need 1 minute. Her hands shook as she pulled out the pouch. She poured whiskey into 1 glass and added the powder, stirring it with her finger until it dissolved. Then she poured 2 more clean glasses for herself and Cora. He's coming, Cora hissed. Della positioned the poisoned glass on the right side of the tray. Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. Colonel Marcus Garrison entered with a satisfied smile. Well now, he said, aren't you two just perfect? Della stepped forward with the tray, keeping her eyes down. Whiskey master? Good girl, you learn fast. He reached for the poisoned glass and downed half of it in 1 swallow. Pour yourselves a drink, girls. I like my companions to be relaxed. We're going to get to know each other very well tonight. He swirled his glass. Your mother was beautiful. Shame what happened to her. But she should have known better than to resist. Resistance only leads to suffering. Della bit her cheek to stay silent. Pour me another, he ordered. This was the dangerous part. Della had only brought enough poison for one dose. She needed to stall. Master, perhaps you'd like to eat something first. I didn't ask for food. I asked for whiskey. Are you disobeying me already? He started to stand, but then he blinked hard and shook his head. Strange. I feel a bit. Must be the heat. The poison was starting to work. He sat back down heavily. Della poured from the clean part of the decanter this time. Cora stood frozen. The colonel's breathing became irregular. Come here, he said to Cora, but his legs wobbled. What the devil? My legs feel... His words slurred. The poison was disrupting his nervous system. Master, should I call for help? Della asked, sounding concerned. Sweat was on his forehead. No, I'm fine. But 20 minutes later, he was furious that his body wouldn't obey. Fetch Ruthie, he croaked. Tell her to bring my heart medicine. Della moved toward the door sill. Behind her, she heard a crash as the colonel fell, shattering the whiskey decanter. His face had gone grey. He clutched his chest. I'll get it, master, Della cried, but she fumbled with the door handle on purpose. By the time she opened it, the colonel was convulsing. The oleander was stopping his heart. Della ran into the hallway, screaming, "Help, the master is dying!" The house erupted in chaos. Ruthie, Pike, and Mrs. Garrison rushed in. It was too late. The colonel's eyes rolled back, and he stopped moving. The doctor arrived an hour later and pronounced the cause as heart failure due to drinking and excitement. No one suspected the girls. They were seen as terrified victims who tried to help. Pike locked them in a storage room. "Is he really dead?" Cora whispered. "He's dead," Della confirmed. "But we're not safe yet." Morning brought a house in mourning. Mrs. Garrison wore black, and the slaves worked with neutral faces. Della and Cora were brought to the parlor 3 days later. "The estate is heavily in debt," Mrs. Garrison said. "Most slaves will be auctioned. However, you've proven useful, Della. I need someone to sort through my husband's papers." She offered them a deal, work for 1 year for wages, and then they would be legally freed. It wasn't fair for the others being sold, but it was a chance at freedom. "We accept," Della said. Della spent her days in the colonel's study. She found records of the women he had abused and the debts he owed. Then she found his will. It had a terrifying clause: if he died before 60, any slaves bought in the last 6 months must be investigated for foul play. He had set a trap. Della knew she had to destroy that page, but she couldn't just burn it. Ruthie caught her reading it. "I know what you did," Ruthie whispered. "The oleander. I noticed the bush was picked weeks ago, but Ruthie wasn't going to tell. The colonel bought my daughter 15 years ago. I never saw her again." "You survived, girl." Ruthie told Della to practice the colonel's handwriting and forge a new page. For a week, Della practiced until her hand cramped. She created a new final page without the investigation clause, soaked it in tea to age it, and swapped it into the folder. When the lawyers came, they didn't suspect a thing. 2 months later, the legal process for their freedom began. They were survivors, and they would finally be free. The judge, a friend of the late colonel, approved the freedom papers with barely a glance at the documents. On January 15, 1838, Della and Cora stood in that same courthouse and received their legal papers. These official documents declared them free persons of color with the right to live and work without being owned by any master. Della read the words over and over, hardly believing they were real. After 16 years of being slaves, after watching their mother hanged, and after poisoning a man to defend themselves, they were free. But freedom came with complicated feelings. As they walked back to the Garrison plantation to begin their year of paid work, they passed the auction house where they had stood on the block just 6 months earlier. A new group of enslaved people was being sold that day. Della saw a mother holding a baby, her eyes full of terror as the auctioneer separated her from her husband. "We should help them," Cora whispered. "We know how to fight back now. We could teach others and get ourselves hanged," Della said, shaking her head. "We barely escaped with our lives. We got lucky. The colonel made mistakes, Ruthie helped us, and the timing was perfect. Most people aren't that lucky. So we just leave them. For now, yes, we survive. We save money. We learn to live as free women in a world that still hates us for the color of our skin. Then, maybe someday we can actually help others, but not yet." The year passed slowly. Della managed the Garrison estate's closing, keeping careful records as property was sold and debts were paid. Mrs. Garrison turned out to be a fair boss, not kind but honest. She paid them on time and did not interfere with their work. Ruthie approached Della one evening in early December. "The auction is next week. I'll be sold to whoever bids the most." "I'm sorry," Della said, and she meant it. "I wish there was something I could do." "There is." Ruthie pressed a small leather pouch into Della's hands. Seeds, oleander, nightshade, foxglove, and others. "I've been collecting them for years, hoping I'd have the courage to use them myself. But I never did." "You did." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Wherever I end up, I'll try to teach other women about these plants, how to find them, and how to prepare them. Maybe some of them will be as brave as you were." "That's dangerous. Everything we do is dangerous. At least this way some of us might survive with our pride intact." On January 15, 1839, exactly 1 year after receiving their freedom papers, Della and Cora walked away from the Garrison plantation. They had $12 each in their pockets, the clothes they were wearing, and Ruthie's seeds hidden in Della's bag. They traveled north to Memphis, where free black communities lived at the edges of society. Della found work as a clerk in a black-owned general store. Cora learned to sew and took in mending. They rented a single room above a stable and saved every penny they could. At night, Della taught other free black women to read and write. This was illegal in Mississippi, but ignored in certain parts of Tennessee. She never told them about the kernel or the poison, but she did tell them about resistance, about fighting back when no other options remained, and about surviving at any cost. Sometimes she wondered if what they had done was murder or justice. Most nights, she decided it was both. 3 years later, they had saved enough money to buy a small house. 5 years after that, Della married a free black carpenter named James, and Cora opened a seamstress shop. They built lives that would have been impossible while they were enslaved. But Della never forgot the auction block. She never forgot the feel of the poisoned powder between her fingers. She never forgot her mother swinging from a rope while white men laughed. And she never forgot that freedom, real freedom, had been won not through kindness or slow progress, but through 2 terrified girls who refused to be victims. They turned their master's own cruelty against him and survived when survival seemed impossible. 20 years later, when the Civil War finally came and slavery was ended by force, Della stood in the streets of Memphis and watched the soldiers march past. She was 36 years old, a mother of 3, and a successful businesswoman. She was living proof that sometimes the oppressed must take justice into their own hands. Waiting for the oppressors to grant freedom means waiting forever. Colonel Marcus Garrison had brought 2 sisters to destroy them. Instead, they destroyed him and built lives he could never have imagined. That was justice enough. This story is a work of historical fiction, showing the brutal realities of American slavery and the extreme measures some people took to defend them. Selves. While the characters are not real, the things they faced, like violence, family separation, and the lack of legal protection, were very real throughout the South.